Hello?
Josh.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview.
Yeah, anytime.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm very excited to be able to have the opportunity to promote the brand new album, which is soon to be coming out. And
Yep.
I wasn't too familiar with this project. I mean, obviously, I know about Propane, but I didn't know about this. How did this all come together?
Well, the idea came about in 2011, and it came about really after years and years worth of touring and being really busy with Propane. And I finally had a little bit of a breather, and I was sort of pondering what I wanted to do, not in terms of making any drastic moves with Propane, but Propane sort of drives itself, it's fairly predictable, we go out there, we do our thing, we come out with an album usually every year, and that's all really great. But when I had a little bit of time off to think about potentially doing something different, I had enough time, I felt, to devote to such a band, or developing a new band. I didn't really want to use the term project because, for me, if I want to really get behind something, I just don't want to do one record and sort of cast a project aside and move on to other things. So I wanted to make sure that I had the time to put into this, and I wanted to surround myself with good people and people I felt a certain level of confidence in. And the first guy I called was Rupert Keplinger, who is our lead guitar player, and a guy responsible for writing the lion's share of the music. We had done a project together in Germany in 2008, and so I met Rupert in the studio in Frankfurt, and we did a project which was the solo album for the bass player for a band called Die Böse Onkels, who are primarily the biggest rock band in Germany, so it was a really important project at that time. And the album went on to become very successful. It landed number 2 on the charts, behind I don't know whether it was, I think, not the latest Madonna album, but the one before that. And it eventually went gold, and was pretty celebrated throughout the German-speaking countries. And when I got to thinking about who I wanted to be involved in this project, or this band, I thought of Rupert first. So I called him up just to see what his interest level was all about, and if he was interested at all. And his response was like, yeah, let's get together and let's carve out a week or two. I'll fly in, and we'll just see what happens. We'll write a bunch of material, and if it's cool, then we'll move forward with it. If not, then we'll just consider it a good holiday, So we got together for 1 week in 2011, and we wrote, I think, 6 or 7 songs, which eventually became part of our debut album, My Only Shelter, which was released toward the end of 2013. And when that album came out, it was met with critical acclaim. It had outstanding reviews, did very well. We did a bit of touring off of that record as well, primarily in the EU. But we got some awards from certain magazines of, best newcomer band, best supporting act, and all this other stuff. So the band had a certain amount of promise, coming right out of the box at the end of 2013. And we've managed to get on some pretty big league festivals over in Europe on the main stage. And we're now about to embark on a headlining tour throughout Germany, the UK, and Belgium. And that's going to be throughout October and November. But in North America, the band is still fairly unheard of. So I think that, what you said earlier is certainly not uncommon for, the average musical consumer here, or the average, fanzine or webzine. So it's pretty new to the North American audience, but it's been part of our agenda, to start with a base somewhere, and that base being the EU and primarily in Germany, and sort of branch out from there, because we're dealing with not so many resources toward the band from our label, and we have to just spend the money wisely, and we figured that, with Germany being the number 3 or 4 biggest record selling market in the world, a smaller amount of resources can go a much longer way in Germany. So that's where we decided to sort of, put all our eggs, so to speak, in the early phases of the band. And once we get a good footing in the EU, then we figured, okay, we're gonna come out and try to start something up in North America, and eventually hopefully get on tour here and get on some bigger bills and start something here.
And I'm glad to see it too, because again, with my first exposure being when Sparks Ignite coming out on Friday, like I was really intrigued by the sound that you guys were going for, because I love that modern tinge of hard rock and darker style music that you guys are going for, and it's done in such a catchy way that I think once people get a chance to check it out, especially here in North America, I think they'll really appreciate what they hear.
Yeah, I think so too. You know, it's a great thing being a band that, you know, a high percentage of people can get into, because it's sort of music for everybody. But that's also the biggest problem in terms of, you know, getting a core audience, because when you're on an indie label such as ourselves, it can be very tedious to try to get some kind of footing. Unless you're a real genre-based band, like if you're playing like extreme metal or hardcore or metalcore, you know, there's an audience for that in terms of the underground and for indie labels and being signed to an indie label. But for a band like us who people would say have a broader commercial potential, it can be very difficult starting out especially on the independent label, because there isn't that underground for this kind of thing, especially in America. Overseas there is, because there's sort of a dark wave scene, and that scene has basically taken us under their wing, which is great. So we can really start out with a bit of an underground movement and grow from there. Over here, you have sort of radio rock, and the major labels kind of control the airwaves to a certain extent. And then you have the genre-based scenes, you know, like metal and hardcore and indie stuff and college rock. So it's a bit trickier, you know. I think it's going to take getting on some good tours and getting a broader amount of exposure here, you know. I think maybe a good radio campaign could go a long ways for the band also, because I think a lot of our stuff could sit well with certain stations, you know, with their formats being the way that they are.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that too. And of course, with the promotion of All of Nothing, I mean, I can see that it does have that potential once the right stations pick it up. I know I'm definitely going to start putting it on my show starting next week, being able to help with promotion, because I think it definitely deserves that promotion here in North America.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And I really hope that it does catch on, because it doesn't sound like something just for popularity's sake. I mean, it sounds like you guys are really into this style of music, which I truly appreciate, because it shows that you can make this style of music and not sound pandering.
Yeah, exactly. That's the important thing. It's the honesty comes through, and I think that's most of the game. You know, for me as a songwriter, the greatest satisfaction is sort of hearing our work for the first time, you know, when the mix is done. And that there within comes the excitement, you know. That's like the greatest feeling for a songwriter. And, you know, the rest is putting the album out and doing interviews and all that other stuff, and trying to, you know, get the music exposed, you know, to as many fans as possible. And that's another side to it, you know. That's a very necessary side, you know, if you want to try to go out there and please as many people as you can with your music, and turning it into something bigger, obviously. But that is not the main motivation, you know. It's the main motivation is to write some great music, you know, and some really interesting, catchy music together. And I think it's really interesting because it's an international group, and we all have very different influences that we're bringing to the table. And so we have some German rock aspects to our music. We have some electronic elements in the music. We have more classic rock melodies with the vocals, and some 80s melodies. So there's all of these things that are being mixed into developing our own sound, which is really interesting for us. And it's always great to see the band not rehashing the same thing over and over again. Now this is our second album, full-length album. We did an EP in between, and each is somewhat different. I think we're pleasing the old fans, and we hope to please all of the old fans with each release. And I think we're gaining a new audience also, because there's always new elements being introduced into our sound, and we're constantly embellishing on it.
Yeah, and I can definitely hear that throughout the album, too, because there is a lot of great diversity in there, from some really quite heavy moments to some nice, very mellow ballads that I just love hearing that kind of diversity on an album.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I've always wanted to make well-rounded records, and with Darkhaus, it's not such a chore, making such a well-rounded record, because there are a lot of lighter moments that we're capable of doing as a band, and we're capable of creating harder music too. I come from a hard music background, and so we're a very capable band. In those terms, we can bring it down to just a piano piece, and Rupert plays some really great piano, and a lot of the musical compositions are initially composed on piano. And so it's a really cool, fun, and interesting way of working, and creating. And it's really interesting for me as a musician and as a writer to see these songs take shape and to be a part of the whole process.
When this all started in 2011 with Darkhaus, did you guys have an idea from the beginning of the style that you wanted to go in, or did it take from just seeing what everyone had from their other projects that they were working on solo, and then deciding from there what direction you wanted to go in?
Well, the band started with just Rupert and myself, so it was just two guys getting together and writing a bunch of music and vocal melodies and laying down all of the lyrics and doing all of the vocal passages myself. So and that formula pretty much goes on to this day also. Before the writing was complete for When Sparks Ignite, all the demoed material was just Rupert and myself again. So we wanted to kind of keep the same core formula happening because we had some success with it. So I would sing all the songs initially for Kenny to learn, and I certainly don't have the chops that he does, but I can get through it in the melodic sense with a certain amount of emotion and a good feeling, and something that Kenny can embellish on. And so before Rupert and I got together for the first session, going back to 2011, the way we left it in our conversations was that we weren't going to have any preconceived notions of what genre we were going for or what the music should be. We said, let's just get together and we'll write spontaneously and we'll see what happens. And maybe it'll be great. Maybe it will be substantially less than stellar, and we'll just consider it a good holiday, But each of us has a pretty good barometer to know if it's happening or not. And we were kind of prepared for either. So we wrote a bunch of music together, and I wrote the lyrics and the vocal melodies. And we recorded them. We recorded the first demo, and we really enjoyed what we came up with, and we decided to just go with it from there. So shortly afterwards, we came up with the name Darkhaus. We added Marshall Stevens, Propane's rhythm guitar player, on rhythm guitar for Darkhaus, because I thought he would fit perfectly, and he really likes all kinds of music. He really appreciates melodic music also, so he was perfect. And then Rupert suggested his friend Paul Keller on drums, who is very good with playing to a click track and recording his own stuff in the studio, so he doesn't need to be monitored, and he just does his own thing and sends us the tracks. And the last member of the band that we got was Kenny Hanlon on vocals. And so it's an international group of people we have, and that reflects itself in the music. It can be difficult sometimes because there's a lot of money that goes out in flights, and as you can imagine, with people from a lot of different parts in the world getting together to do tours and getting together to rehearse. So it's a very expensive band to have, but it's a good investment for us because we believe in it, and so far so good. Things are really looking up, and we hope that we're going to have a lot more people on board with us after this album comes out on the 30th. So. And
what has been the initial reaction to the new stuff? Have you heard anything from it yet?
Yeah, we got a bunch of reviews out so far. They've been really great. And, we've had nothing but really great compliments toward the material. Even from some of the harder metal zines, which for a band such as ourselves can be a bit difficult sometimes because they tend to be very partial toward extreme music. But we find that most of the more extreme webzines and magazines found a lot of good things to say about Darkhaus. Sometimes they'll say, hey, it's not my genre, so to speak, but it's a really good record nonetheless, and it's always good to hear. Magazines and reviewers that are into darkwave music and are into more melodic music, I think that's easier for us because they recognize that the songs are sort of what they can relate to and what they're accustomed to listening to,
Yeah, and I think that really goes to show what musicians are really capable of, too, because when you get pigeonholed as just being part of one genre or one band, and you finally do get to branch out, just like this, I mean, obviously Propane being much different than Darkhaus, it's really rewarding as a musician to be able to branch out and show those different styles, and for the fans and possibly new fans that come of it, appreciating what you can do in all styles.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you wish that people could see behind the scenes because they can pigeonhole you sometimes, and they put you in a box, and they think, well, that's all we're going to get out of this guy, is some shouting and some Propane stuff. But my influences are pretty vast, and I want people to know that I'm just not about hardcore music and heavier music. I appreciate all different kinds of music, and I'm a big fan of very melodic stuff and any music that touches me. I like ballads, I like softer music. I like soft rock from the 70s, and I like a lot of 80s new wave stuff. I'm just a fan of music, and I like writing all different styles, and it's cool to come out and show the fans that I'm a bit more multi-dimensional as a songwriter and as a musician, after all these years.
Yeah, I mean, even if the reception wasn't there yet, I mean, obviously with the second album coming out on Friday, with North America not being possibly as familiar as, obviously with Europe and Germany being able to get that real first exposure, it's just like, I think it might be a bit of a culture shock for some of the Propane fans to be able to hear Darkhaus, but if they're anything like me, they would be able to appreciate both and see both styles that you can go for, and just show that you don't need to just listen to one style of music to feel inspired, that you can find anything in any music that you enjoy and be able to find something inspiring from it.
Yeah, I mean, we've every now and then we post some Darkhaus news on various Propane forums, and on the Facebook page and stuff like that. And the Propane fans are generally pretty receptive. I mean, I see quite a few Propane fans at Darkhaus shows. I see more Darkhaus fans at Propane shows, and I'm not sure why that is, but it's nice to see a mix, and it's nice to see that at least a percentage of those audiences can appreciate a completely different style, as I do.
Yeah, and again, just from a musician's standpoint, I mean, when you only surround yourself in one style of music, it's really hard to feel creative, inspired, if that's all you're forced to listen to and that's all that comes out of you. So when you are able to listen to 70s soft rock, 80s ballads, everything that's out there, it just makes you that much inspired, and that's why I'm really drawn to the new Darkhaus album, because there is so much inspiration that I hear from it. I mean, it sounds very inspired by all five of you guys.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and for me, it also helps Propane because it keeps Propane pretty pure, and Propane is a band that we have experimented with our sound in certain regards over the years. Around 2008, 2009, we took the vocals in a little bit more of a heavy melodic range here and there, and I felt the need to do it at the time, and I don't know how well it served the band, from a commercial standpoint, because it sort of divided our audience a little bit. Some people thought it was great, and some new people came on board, and you had some old fans that were, screaming up and down that, that we should go back to the old way of doing things. And so you always have to take things with a grain of salt. You don't want to write just because of your audience, but you don't want to neglect them either. So it's sort of a tightrope, that you're always walking as a writer. And with Darkhaus, I get to explore all of this new and different and exciting territory in terms of things that I want to write and different styles I want to write. And perhaps, that's, in a sense, made Propane go in a little bit more brutal direction, which I can't say for sure, but if I had to look for reasons why, I would say that probably had something to do with it.
And would you say that'd be like true of upcoming Propane material? I mean, is that becoming more heavier because of this?
Well, we constantly think of ways to try to make a different record, but have it still being a Propane record in the end. And for a band like Propane, that's 25 years into the game, it's not the easiest thing to do, because you're sort of operating inside of a box, and you want to raise the ceiling a little bit as much as you can. But if you raise it too much, you're going to piss off a lot of fans, And we want to make something that we're really happy with at the end of the day, but also that the fans are happy with. So for the next album, I think the idea going into the recording is that we're not going to record with the click track and have more tempo changes. And so it'll be the first album in Propane's career that'll be recorded sort of off the grid, And I think that's interesting, So we're looking for new ways to create something fresh with a band that has 15 studio albums under its belt, and to leave room for further excitement and to get new fans.
Yeah, and that's a great source of creativity as well, because it's one thing to be able to have like the tightest tempo changes and everything on an album, especially coming from a click track. But when you write without a click track, there's so much room for interpretation.
Yeah, that's very true. When you write without a click track, one of the things that I would certainly prefer is to have a drummer in the room, because you're not sitting there writing to a metronome. So it's very different, and you want to be able to capture, go with that feel, And the drummers that I've had in recent years are all from Europe, and I always found myself just sitting with a click track or whatever and just writing a bunch of material and sending it over for people to learn. And that served the band at that time, perfectly. Everything was fine, but now I really feel the need to do something a little bit different once again with Propane, and perhaps we'll just fly our drummer in for a few weeks and for some writing sessions. But it's still early in the game, I don't think we're gonna start writing anything until January, because we're gonna be busy starting with this next Darkhaus tour in October, and then through the rest of the year with Darkhaus and Propane. Different schedules, of course, but it's going to keep me busy till Christmas. And I think sometime in January we'll start writing a new Propane album, and hopefully that'll come out sometime in the late spring, I think.
Oh, very cool. I'll definitely be looking forward to that. And
cool.
Again, it's very cool to be able to help promote this brand new Darkhaus album, because I think it's definitely something that deserves to be heard, whether you're already a fan of the more dark wave European hard rock and metal, or if you're a longtime Propane fan, being able to see all the different sides that are going on, because you can definitely hear everyone's backgrounds in the album all fused together in this great, catchy, dark, melodic way, which I can really appreciate and be able to listen from start to finish, and it doesn't sound old, it doesn't sound like it's lagging in any way, it just continues to sound fresh and inspired. And I think when the album comes out on Friday, I think a lot of people will be able to appreciate that as well.
Well, it's great to hear, man. I'm glad you enjoy the album so much, and I'm grateful that you're helping us out with promotion and stuff too.
Oh, I'm very glad to be able to do that.
Awesome, man.
Yeah. With Darkhaus, was there anything that didn't make it on the album yet that might make it into a future release, or was like all the songs already in order before you guys started recording?
Well, there were some like semi-arrangements, I guess you could say, because when we would get a little bit into a song and then we figured that it wasn't album-worthy for this album, we sort of cast it aside half done and went on to the next song, you know. So we have pieces of certain songs laying around. I would say probably 5 or 6 unfinished arrangements. And you never know. I mean, if something doesn't make it on a certain record at one particular time, it doesn't mean that it won't eventually serve a future album well, you know? I mean, sometimes I'll pull up riffs from Propane that I've written years ago that just didn't really suit the band at the time, that I felt it was perfect to, you know, like at a later date.
Yeah, and it's a good idea to be able to keep those riffs around, because sometimes it might not feel inspired when you first come up with it, but years or albums down the road, you can be able to come back to those riffs and be able to find something that just matches perfectly with it and make a fantastic song out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's nice to have things in the archive too. We had quite a few from the last album, from the recording sessions. And I think we still have some stuff in the archives. And it's always really cool and great for the fans too to be able to pull something, you know, out of the drawer, you know, years later from the original sessions. I think it's, especially if it's quality stuff, you know.
Yeah, and after getting my first exposure to Darkhaus with When Sparks Ignite, I'm very excited to see what you guys are going to be having in the future, and I'm definitely going to be going back and checking out the EP and first album as well, because I love what I'm hearing from When Sparks Ignite coming out on Friday, and I can't wait to see what you guys are going to be having throughout the rest of the band's career.
Well, thanks, man. I will definitely pass your sentiments on to the rest of the band. They'll be glad to hear everything.
Well, again, thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I mean, being a longtime Propane fan and now a newborn Darkhaus fan, it's an honor to be able to talk to you. Before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to mention that I haven't brought up yet?
Well, look for us online, you know, on Darkhaus Official on Facebook, and also at darkhausmusic.com for all things Darkhaus. And we just released a new video. You can see it on YouTube. It's for the first song on the record called All of Nothing. And we just put a new tour trailer up today on the Facebook, so fans can check that out. And look for the album release this Friday. It's When Sparks Ignite. Check it out.